The war had not yet turned against him, but Robb Stark knew he was walking a dangerous path. His bannermen were loyal, but they were growing restless. The war had stretched on longer than expected, and despite his victories, he had no clear path to victory. More troubling than that was the mistake he had made, falling in love with Talisa Maegor. Robb had wanted to follow his heart, as his father once had, but Catelyn Stark's desperate warnings haunted him. Breaking his marriage pact with House Frey could cost them dearly. Walder Frey was not a man to be insulted lightly. The Riverlands were already unstable, and losing the twins as an ally could cripple their supply lines. Then came an unexpected offer from the Tyrells. Margaery Tyrell was already betrothed to Renly Baratheon, but his claim to the throne was weak, and his army, while formidable, was fragmented. Robb had never met her, but he had heard of her beauty, charm, and political cunning. More importantly, she came with the might of the Reach, the most fertile and populous region in Westeros. If the Tyrells turned their banners north instead of south, the Starks would have more than enough strength to challenge the Lannisters. The decision was not an easy one, but after long counsel with his mother, his uncle Edmure, and his bannermen, Robb agreed. Talisa, though heartbroken, understood. She would not stand in the way of a union that could save the North. The marriage was arranged in secret, with Loras Tyrell himself riding north to finalize the terms. When Robb met Margaery for the first time in River Run, he was surprised. She was not just beautiful, but clever, with a keen understanding of politics that he lacked. Unlike Talisa, she knew the dangers of the game they were playing. She knew how to win it. Their wedding was held in the Godswood, beneath the Heart Tree, an unorthodox ceremony for a highborn lady of the Reach. But Margaery had insisted that she wished to honor the customs of her new home. The northern lords, skeptical at first, found themselves warming to her as she spoke of her admiration for the resilience of the North. And so, House Stark and House Tyrell were bound by marriage, and the war for the Iron Throne changed forever. The news of Robb Stark's marriage to Margaery Tyrell reached King's Landing faster than anyone had expected. Ravens flew from Riverrun, and soon the whispers spread like wildfire across the Seven Kingdoms. In the Red Keep, Tywin Lannister sat in his solar, rereading the letter with cold, calculating eyes. He was not a man easily shaken, but this was an unexpected and dangerous move. The North and the Reach united. Kevan Lannister muttered beside him. This changes everything. Tywin nodded grimly. He had counted on House Tyrell remaining, allied to his cause. After Renly's death, he had pulled Mace Tyrell into his orbit, securing their forces for the Lannisters. It was the Tyrell-Lannister alliance that had saved King's Landing during Stannis Baratheon's assault on the Blackwater. But now, Robb Stark had secured the Tyrells before Tywin could, and with them came the full might of the Reach, the vast grain fields, the gold, and the soldiers. Joffrey, sitting nearby, scoffed. What does it matter? The so-called king in the north is still a traitor. We'll crush him like the dog he is. Tywin did not even look at him. Foolish boy, he muttered. This is not just a marriage, this is war. Cersei's face was dark with fury. Margaery was meant to be ours. That little viper slithered her way into the Starks' camp instead. Varys, listening quietly, finally spoke. This is more than just an alliance, my lord. The common people adore the Starks. They see Robb as a noble warrior, much like his father, and Margaery. She is beloved by the South. Together, they could rally both North and South against you. Tywin remained silent for a moment before he spoke, his voice colder than steel. Send a raven to Walder Frey. Kevan frowned. Lord Frey will be furious. He expected a Stark bride for his son. Good, Tywin said simply. A wounded dog bites the hardest. But even as he set his schemes into motion, he knew this war had changed. It was no longer just the North rising in rebellion. It was a war for the very future of Westeros. Back in River Run, Robb Stark wasted no time. With Margaery at his side, he called a war council. The lords of the north, the Riverlands, and now the Reach gathered to discuss their next move. Lord Roose Bolton, ever calculating, spoke first. King's Landing will not sit idle. Tywin Lannister will strike before we can consolidate our forces. I agree, said Lord Rickard Karstark. We should march south before the Lions can regroup. Edmure Tully, newly married to a Frey daughter in an attempt to smooth over the insult to Walder Frey, looked uneasy. My lords, we must not forget that the Riverlands are still at war. The Lannisters still hold Harrenhal, and Sir Gregor Clegane continues to burn our villages. Sir Loras Tyrell, ever eager for battle, slammed his fist on the table. Then let's take Harrenhal. With the Reach behind us, we can push the Lannisters out of the Riverlands and march straight to King's Landing. But Robb, though young, had learned much in war. He studied the map carefully before speaking. Harrenhal is a stronghold, but it is not our true goal. King's Landing is. All eyes turned to him. The Lannisters are at their strongest when they are unified, but if we strike fast, before they can recover from our alliance, we can break them. Robb's voice was steady, his blue eyes sharp with determination. We will march south. With our full force, the North, the Riverlands, and the Reach together, we will take King's Landing and end the war. Margaery, seated beside him, smiled slightly. And when we do, the people will cheer for their new king and queen. The war for Westeros had begun in earnest. The march south was unlike anything Westeros had seen in generations. The banners of the direwolf, the golden rose, and the leaping trout flew side by side as tens of thousands of men moved as one. The North had provided the hardened warriors, battle-worn and eager for vengeance. The Reach supplied sheer numbers and wealth, their knights gleaming in steel. The Riverlords, fighting to reclaim their home, brought fury. At the head of the host rode Robb Stark, his direwolf Grey Wind always at his side. He no longer felt like the boy who had ridden south after his father's death. He had won battles, lost friends, and made hard choices. He had married not for love, but for duty. And Margaery, though unfamiliar at first, had proven herself invaluable. She did not shy away from the brutal reality of war, nor did she waste time with false modesty. She understood what was at stake and how to wield her influence. As they crossed into the Crownlands, the war changed. The small folk flocked to their cause, emboldened by tales of the young wolf's victories and Margaery's generosity. Unlike the Lannisters, who ruled through fear, Robb and Margaery's alliance had the love of the people. Wherever they passed, the commoners cheered, calling Robb the true king. But not all news was good. Late one evening, as their war council met within a tent lined with battle maps, a scout arrived, breathless and bloodied. Lord Stark, the Freys have betrayed us. A chill spread through the room. What happened? Robb demanded. The scout knelt, his voice strained. Walder Frey has declared for the Lannisters. They hold the twins against us and have sent word to Tywin Lannister. A force marches from the Westerlands as we speak. The council erupted in arguments. Frey is an old bitter fool, Edmure Tully spat. We should have crushed him when we had the chance. Roose Bolton, ever unreadable, spoke smoothly. We should not be hasty. Frey is treacherous, but Tywin Lannister is the greater threat. Robb clenched his fists. He had known insulting the Freys would have consequences, but he had not anticipated. Walder Frey siding so openly with the Lannisters. Margaery, ever the strategist, spoke up. This does not change our course. If anything, it means we must move faster. The longer we wait, the more time Tywin has to prepare. Loras Tyrell, gripping the hilt of his sword, nodded. King's Landing must fall before the Lannisters can reinforce it. Robb made his decision. We march at dawn. There would be no turning back. Dawn broke over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the marching armies. The banners of House Stark, Tyrell, and Tully fluttered in the wind, as their combined forces encircled King's Landing. From the walls, the Lannister guards watched in grim silence, knowing that the largest army Westeros had seen in decades now stood at their doorstep. Robb Stark sat atop his warhorse, his eyes fixed on the Red Keep in the distance. Beside him, Margaery Tyrell looked every inch a queen, clad in fine armor beneath a flowing green cloak embroidered with golden roses. She had insisted on being present, not merely as a figurehead, but as a symbol of the alliance that had brought them here. Inside the city, panic spread. Tywin Lannister was not there. He was still marching from the Westerlands. The weight of defending King's Landing fell on Queen Regent Cersei and the sadistic boy king Joffrey Baratheon. But without the Tyrells or their reinforcements, the capital was vulnerable. At midday, Robb sent riders to the city gates under a white flag of truce. The message was simple: surrender or we storm the city. Joffrey's response was predictable. From the walls, he had the Stark envoys executed, their bodies flung down for all to see. His cruel laughter echoed over the battlefield. But Robb did not flinch. He had expected as much. The war horns sounded. The siege had begun. The battle for the gates. The Tyrell siege engines were the first to fire. Massive trebuchets hurled boulders at the walls, shattering stone and sending defenders scrambling for cover. The Tyrells, masters of logistics, had brought everything needed for a prolonged siege: food, supplies, and weapons in abundance. The Northmen, hardened by the brutal winters, had patience. They could wait, but Robb had no intention of waiting. The longer we delay, the greater the risk of Tywin arriving with reinforcements, he told his commanders. We take the city before he can reach us. The Northmen led the first assault. Battering rams smashed against the city gates while ladders rose against the walls. Arrows rained down from above, but the Stark archers answered in kind. Sir Loras Tyrell, riding at the head of his knights, led a cavalry charge against the Mudgate. The defenders fought fiercely, but the Tyrell soldiers outnumbered them. At the same time, the River Lords launched an attack on the Blackwater Bay side of the city. Edmure Tully led his men across makeshift rafts, attempting to breach the walls from the docks. And then the unthinkable happened. Wildfire. Green flames erupted from hidden barrels, consuming men and horses alike. Screams filled the air as hundreds were burned alive. Cersei had not forgotten the lessons of the Blackwater. Even without Tyrion to guide her, she had ensured that the pyromancers kept their deadly reserves ready. For a moment, it seemed as though the attack had stalled. Then Robb Stark himself rode forward. Rallying his men, he led a direct charge toward the main gates. Grey Wind, his direwolf, tore through the enemy ranks, and the Northmen, inspired by their king's bravery, pressed forward with renewed fury. By nightfall, the gates began to splinter. The city's outer defenses were failing. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei clutched her son's arm. "Joffrey, we must prepare to flee. The city is lost." But the boy king was too arrogant, too blinded by cruelty to see the truth. "I am the king. They will never take my city." Cersei's lips curled in disgust. "You are a fool." For the first time, she realized what true defeat felt like. Outside, the walls of King's Landing trembled. Victory was near. The gates of King's Landing splintered just before dawn. The massive wooden beams, reinforced with iron, finally gave way under the relentless assault of the Northmen and Tyrell forces. With a final, earth-shaking crack, the city was open. Robb Stark rode at the front, Grey Wind bounding ahead, the direwolf's eyes blazing with the thrill of the hunt. His sword, soaked in battle, gleamed in the dim light as he led his men into the streets. The Tyrell knights followed close behind, their banners flowing like a sea of gold and green, while the River Lords surged in from the docks. The battle was far from over. The Lannister guards fought with desperation, knowing there was no mercy for them. In the streets, fighting broke out on every corner, soldiers clashing in brutal, bloody combat. The small folk, many of whom had suffered under Joffrey's reign, either hid in terror or took up arms against their oppressors. Sir Loras Tyrell, his armour stained with the blood of battle, led his knights toward the Red Keep. He was driven by personal vengeance. Joffrey had once been meant to wed his sister, but instead he had humiliated and discarded her. Loras would see the boy king pay for his cruelty. At the great sept of Baelor, Queen Regent Cersei Lannister stood with her youngest son, Tommen. She clutched a small vial of nightshade in one hand, her face pale but resolute. "If the city falls, we will not live as captives," she whispered. But as the sounds of battle grew closer, a messenger arrived. His face was streaked with blood and sweat. "Your Grace, the city is lost. The Red Keep is under attack." Cersei's breath hitched. She turned to Tommen, smoothing his golden curls. "Do not be afraid, my sweet boy. Soon we will be free of this world." But before she could act, the doors to the sept were thrown open. Margaery Tyrell entered, flanked by guards. Her gown was smeared with dust, her hands gripping the hilt of a dagger. "Put the poison down, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady. Cersei's eyes burned with hatred. "You think you've won?" Margaery stepped forward. "I know I have." The two women faced each other, queens in their own right. One had ruled through fear and manipulation, the other through charm and strategy. Cersei laughed bitterly. "Do you truly believe Robb Stark will let you rule by his side? You are nothing more than a pawn." Margaery smiled, unshaken. "Then I will be the most powerful pawn in Westeros." Defeated, Cersei let the vial slip from her fingers. The reign of the Lannisters was over, the end of a tyrant. At the Red Keep, Joffrey Baratheon was dragged from his chambers, kicking and screaming. His golden crown tumbled to the ground as Northmen seized him, their faces filled with contempt. "You cannot do this," he screeched. "I am your king." Robb Stark stood before him, his expression unreadable. He had not come for vengeance. He had come for justice. "The North remembers," he said. Joffrey's execution was swift. The people of King's Landing, long tormented by his cruelty, watched in silence as their young tyrant was put to death. Some wept in relief, others cheered. When it was done, Robb Stark turned to the gathered lords. "The war is over." But even as the banners of House Stark were raised over the city, Robb knew that peace would not come easily. The Game of Thrones was not won by swords alone. It was far from over. The Red Keep, once a symbol of Lannister dominance, now flew the direwolf of House Stark alongside the golden rose of House Tyrell. King's Landing belonged to Robb Stark, but the weight of victory sat heavy on his shoulders. The city still reeked of blood and burning flesh. The war was over, but ruling was a battle of its own. Inside the throne room, the great hall was filled with lords and bannermen, their voices murmuring in anticipation. The Iron Throne loomed at the end of the hall, sharp and unforgiving. It had been won through fire and steel, but now it had to be tamed. Robb did not sit upon it. Instead, he stood before the gathered lords, Margaery by his side. She had proven herself time and again on the battlefield, in the war councils, and now in the delicate dance of politics. She was the queen the realm needed. "I did not march south to claim a throne of swords," Robb said, his voice carrying through the hall. "I marched to bring justice for my family, for the North, for all those who suffered under the Lannisters." The hall fell silent. Then Roose Bolton stepped forward. His pale eyes flickered with something unreadable. "And yet, my king, Westeros needs a ruler. Will you claim the throne, or will you return north?" Robb met his gaze. "The North is my home, it will always be my home, but I will not abandon the South to chaos. I will see a just ruler sit the throne." The lords exchanged glances. Some had expected him to seize power. Others had feared. Yet Margaery, ever the politician, took a step forward. "The realm has suffered enough. We do not need another war to decide who wears a crown. We need peace." Sir Loras Tyrell, ever her loyal brother, nodded. House Tyrell has stood beside House Stark in this war. We will stand beside them in peace as well. Then Edmure Tully spoke. And what of the Iron Throne? If not you, my lord, then who? Robb let the question linger in the air. He had thought long and hard on this. He had no desire to rule the entire realm, but he would not see it fall into chaos. I will name a ruler who will keep the peace, who will be strong but just, someone who understands the cost of war. His gaze turned to Margaery. A hush fell over the room. Margaery's lips parted in shock. For all her ambition, she had not expected this. Robb turned back to the gathered lords. Queen Margaery will rule the Seven Kingdoms. She has the wisdom, the influence, and the loyalty of the Reach. And she has seen what happens when rulers govern through fear. That ends today. The hall erupted in murmurs. Roose Bolton studied the scene, his face unreadable. Edmure Tully looked relieved. The Tyrells exchanged glances, but Loras nodded approvingly. Margaery finally found her voice. "And you, my lord? Will you return to the north?" Robb nodded. "The north must be free. House Stark will not kneel to another king. The north will govern itself as it once did, as it was meant to." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "The north will be independent," Robb declared. "We will honor our alliances, but we will kneel to no one." The room was stunned into silence. The Seven Kingdoms had not been truly seven in centuries, but in that moment it became clear. Westeros was changing. Robb had fought to avenge his father. Now he would build the future his father had wanted. Margaery stepped forward, lifting her chin. "Then let it be so. The north shall be free, and the realm shall have its queen." Loras Tyrell drew his sword. "All hail Queen Margaery, first of her name." One by one the lords knelt. The war had ended, but a new age had just begun. The north had its freedom. The south had its queen. As the dust of war settled, the realm stood on the precipice of a new age. Robb Stark, the young wolf, had won his war, not by seizing a throne, but by reshaping Westeros itself. In the days following Margaery's coronation, King's Landing underwent a transformation. The banners of House Lannister were torn down, their golden lions replaced with the rose of House Tyrell. The streets, once filled with fear and starvation, now bustled with life as the Tyrells brought food, trade, and stability. The first act of Queen Margaery's rule was one of mercy. She ordered an end to the executions, sparing those who had been forced to serve under Joffrey's tyranny. Even Cersei Lannister was not put to death, though she was stripped of her title and sent to the Rock in disgrace, a prisoner in her own ancestral home. But Robb Stark had no desire to linger in the south. He and his army began their journey back north, leaving behind the politics and schemes of King's Landing. The war had changed him, hardened him, but as he crossed the neck and saw the familiar lands of his ancestors, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Winterfell stood proud once more, its halls filled with the sounds of life. Bran and Rickon, thought dead, had been found and restored to their rightful home. The North rejoiced at their return, and Robb was greeted as a king, not of Westeros, but of the North alone. Sansa Stark, freed from her captivity in King's Landing, was reunited with her family. Though she had suffered much, she had grown wise in her trials. No longer the naive girl who had once dreamed of being queen, she took her place as the Lady of Winterfell, guiding the North with grace and wisdom. Arya, the lost wolf, had not yet returned. She was still somewhere beyond the walls of Westeros, chasing vengeance, carving her own path. But Robb knew one day she would come home. In the south, Queen Margaery ruled with strength and cunning. She surrounded herself with wise counselors, ensuring that the kingdom remained stable. Though her marriage to Robb had united the realm in war, their paths now diverged, she a queen in the south, he a king in the north. And so the North remained free. For the first time in centuries, the Starks ruled as kings in their own right. No longer bound by the politics of the South, no longer beholden to a throne of swords, but winter was coming. Beyond the wall, the true enemy still stirred. The whispers of the White Walkers had not faded, and the long night had yet to fall. The war for the throne was over, but the battle for survival had only just begun.